Every 4th of July, Americans gather to celebrate the birth of their nation. There are fireworks, parades, flags flying proudly. It's a day that reminds us how far we've come. But few people realize that another 4th of July, 22 years before the Declaration of Independence, marked one of the darkest days in the life of a young Virginia officer named George Washington. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a triumph. It was a surrender. And without that defeat, the Washington we remember today might never have existed. In the summer of 1754, 22-year-old George Washington found himself on the edge of the American frontier. Britain and France were both claiming the vast Ohio country, and neither nation was willing to back down. The forests west of the Appalachian Mountains had become the center of a growing struggle that would eventually reshape North America. Washington had already earned a reputation as a capable surveyor and an ambitious young officer, but he had never commanded troops in a major campaign. Now, he had been given an enormous responsibility: protect British interests, drive back the French, and establish a military presence deep in the wilderness. It was an assignment that would test every skill he possessed. Washington and his men pushed west through dense forests, muddy trails, and endless rain. They eventually reached a clearing known as Great Meadows. Believing the open meadow offered a strategic advantage, Washington ordered his men to build a small circular stockade. It became known as Fort Necessity. Construction was rushed and supplies were limited. The fort sat in low grounds, surrounded by higher wooded terrain. What appeared to be a reasonable position soon became a deadly disadvantage. On July 3rd, 1754, French soldiers accompanied by Native American allies advanced toward the fort. The attack began. Musket fire echoed through the trees. Smoke drifted across the meadow. Rain poured down, soaking gunpowder, flooding trenches, and turning the battlefield into thick mud. Inside the fort, Washington's men fought as long as they could, but the situation grew worse with every passing hour. By nightfall, Washington faced a decision no commander ever wants to make: continue fighting or surrender. On the evening of July 3rd, negotiations began, and shortly after midnight, the Articles of Surrender were signed. The young officer who dreamed of defending British America had instead suffered a humiliating defeat. His men marched away from Fort Necessity. His first independent command had failed. Many careers have ended after failures like this. George Washington's did not. He studied what had happened. He learned from poor positioning, from inadequate preparation, from overconfidence, from the realities of leading men under impossible conditions. Failure became one of his greatest teachers, and 22 years later, history presented George Washington with another 4th of July. This time, America celebrated independence. 21 years earlier, George Washington had been just 22 years old. Entrusted with the lives of other men, his first campaign ended in defeat. That small battle became part of a conflict that spread across continents, a war many historians now regard as the first true global war. For a young officer, the weight of that defeat must have been overwhelming. No one would have blamed him for leaving military service behind. He came from a respected Virginia family. He had every opportunity to live a comfortable life and leave the failure in the past. But he chose a different path. 21 years later, when America needed a commander, it found not the young man who had surrendered at Fort Necessity, but the man those hard lessons had helped prepare. History remembers George Washington as the first president of the United States, but perhaps one of his greatest achievements came long before that. He refused to let his first great failure become his final chapter. And perhaps that's why these stories still matter, because every generation faces moments that seem impossible. Every generation must decide whether failure is the end of the story or the beginning of something greater. And that is how George Washington became a great American.